cops have read it. What's the most bullshit sounding excuse you got that actually turned out to be true? No cops are posting in here anyway, so I'll throw my hat into the ring as a defense attorney. Guy pulled over for impaired driving and charged later with OE. My boss gets the criminal complaint and the guy shows up for his initial appearance and tells her he hadn't been drinking despite horrifically failing the sobriety test. She's literally sitting next to him and he's obviously wasted again. Disappointing but not uncommon for alcoholics. The deputies arrest him for bail jumping because he drove himself to court that day and while out on bail he's not supposed to drink. He adamantly denies drinking. Blood tests come back. He didn't drink. Dude's diabetic without knowing it and naturally got himself drunk because sometimes when it goes untreated, diabetes can cause symptoms that look just like intoxication. Got him some insulin and the charge is dismissed. Edit. Since there are so many people with the same questions as far as I'm aware, the guy did the field sobriety test and failed. The last part of the test is the breathalyzer which he refused. Refusal is an automatic failure in and of itself without failing the nystagmus. Follow the finger, walk, leg lift, and count. He didn't know he had diabetes. I already stated it in the original comment but yeah, dude developed diabetes at some point and wasn't aware he had it until the case. OE in Wisconsin is what DUI is in other parts of the US. Your first OE is not a criminal offense, it's just a ticket in Wisconsin, so it would have been at least this guy's second drunk driving accusation, but seeing as diabetes wasn't raised as a defense the first time, my assumption is he probably developed it after. Okay, so I'm going to tell my crazy story as the person on behind the wheel. My uncle was divorcing his terrible wife. He was no saint, but definitely on the right side of their divorce. The wife was still on the paperwork to take their 2 kids out of the school, even though my uncle had temporary custody, while the courts did their thing. She had previously threatened to take them both and just run away, so I don't know why she was still on the paperwork. On picture day that year, she showed up to the school and signed both kids out and disappeared. I was not involved in the crazy process of calling the police and tracking the kids down, but I was pulled from school that day because I had my driver's license and could be an extra pair of hands. They managed to find the kids and they were turned over my grandmother and mom, but my niece was distraught that she would be missing picture day. It was her first time away from her terrible mother and she was finally allowed to be a cheerleader, a dream in her tiny eyes. So, me having my car and nothing else better to do, offered to take her back to the school. My mom got the school to agree to keep the person there a little longer, but it was going to be by the skin of our teeth that we would make it as this was rural. Okay. We got in the car and I blasted down those dirt roads doing approximate 70 in a 35. Not a good decision on my part, but I was an anxiety-ridden 17-year-old dealing with a nasty divorce and kidnapping for the first time in my life. We, of course, get pulled over. I'm freaking out cause I can't afford that bad of ticket and all the crap that was coming in that day. The cop listened to the story and ignored my barely held in tears and said he would let us off with a warning because he believed the story. And the only reason he believed the story was that he had just pulled over my uncle going the same speed the opposite direction on the same road and go the same story. Edit. My cousin, not my niece. She has that sound in her name and I always get it wrong. And I have not idea if my uncle got a ticket as I was too self-absorbed at 17 to consider asking him. Not a cop, but I have a pretty good one. In high school some of my buddies sold weed, driving around in a car with a scale, baggies, and 2 4-ounces at any given time. One day T&D decided to go to a really good taco stand for lunch in between deliveries. He is driving. They are making their way downtown when he starts laughing. E, did you see that? T, no. What? E, I'll turn around. You gotta see this. T, dude, don't get us pulled over. What the fuck? Chill. E makes a U-turn and turns down a street. Nothing there, so he stops in front of a random house to look around. T, what the fuck was it? Just drive. E, I just saw a dude pushing a stroller with 2 wiener dogs in it. T, you're retarded. As soon as he started driving again, a cop car pulls up behind them and lights them up. Cop 1, what are you guys doing? Panicking a bit, I saw a guy pushing a stroller with Weiner dogs in it and had to show my friend cop 2 how come you're parked in front of this known trap house and your car smells like dope. Silence. See this guy with a stroller and cops get out of the car gets searched. They find all the shit as they're getting loaded into the back of the cop car all handcuffed up. Cop 2 just stops cop to hey cop 1, look at that. Cop 1, no shit. Everyone looks up at this old guy pushing a stroller with his 2 Weiner dogs poking their heads out. Cops burst out laughing. They both got charged with possession / trafficking. Good times. Edit. Wow, I've never had a comment blow up like this. Since everyone loves stories about E so much, here's another one for ya. A while before the infamous Weiner dog incident, he had to get new tires for his car. Brought it into a local tire shop and left it there for the day. Point being, the brilliant kid that he was, he left his stash in his favorite hiding spot, thinking nobody would ever find it. The hiding spot was in his spare tire compartment under the carpet in the hatchback / trunk area. The guy changing his tires over was courteous enough to make sure his spare had the manufacturer recommended amount of air pressure in it. He helped himself to a nos of high quality bud while he was in there. He was pissed. He told us about it while we were blazing that night. We all laughed, thought it was great. He didn't. He strutted into that tire shop the next day and demanded to speak with the manager. Told him that his employee stole something from the back of his car and he wanted it back. When he refused to tell the manager what was stolen, the manager basically told him he couldn't do anything if he didn't know what it was and suggested he call the cops. If he wants to escalate things, he didn't call the cops. I had a run-in with the cops a few years ago, and I wonder exactly what they thought when they first stopped me. I had taken a cab back from a work party, and I was pretty drunk. My friend and I had just moved to this new apartment, so I accidentally gave the cab driver the wrong address. I ended up on a block that looked very similar to mine, and a building that looked like mine. There were 2 doors before getting to my apartment door, which was on the 1st floor. Like my apartment building, they left the first door unlocked and locked the second door. I kept trying my keys to open it, but I couldn't and was confused. I went outside to look for my car, and it wasn't parked there. That's when I realized I was on the wrong block. I started walking in the direction I thought my apartment was when a cop car pulls up. They ask me what I'm doing, and I tell them I'm really drunk and I just want to go home, which was the honest truth. They told me they got a call about someone trying to get into an apartment building. I guess the people in that apartment building woke up and thought I was trying to break in. They were super suspicious of me at first, but eventually it became clear I was just some drunk idiot and not a burglar. They ran me through to make sure I didn't have warrants or anything, and when I checked out they offered me a ride home. The ride back was hilarious, because when we were getting to my apartment I tried telling them that it was a bit complicated to get to because of all the one-way streets. The officer driving was like, "Who do you think you're with?" and then turned on the lights and went the wrong way down the street to get me home faster. It honestly felt like I was with the 2 cops from Superbad. Not a cop, but I once got pulled over by a fire truck. It was Orlando, in August, 1990. It was close to 100 outside. I worked for a computer rental company. We would rent computers to companies in town for trade shows, or for a lot of other situations. The company van was a ragged out Chrysler minivan with 180k miles on it. The account didn't work, so the windows were down. I was coming back to the office in heavy rush hour traffic, and I found myself in a right turn only lane and couldn't get out in time. So I was forced to make the right turn. I hit the gas to speed up and get in front of people making a left turn into my same direction. I had to get all the way over to the left side to make a U-turn. So I cut off a fire truck to do it. One of the big squarish fire trucks with a flat front. I cut them off and got in the left turn lane to wait for the green arrow. I looked out the window to my left and saw a Dixie chopper lawnmower mowing the grass on the side of the road maybe 15 feet from me. It was already hot, but this tremendous wave of heat came in through the driver's side window. I thought, man, that's a hot lawnmower. The light turned green and I started my U-turn. Halfway through it, this cloud of, I thought, steam came out of the hood and covered the windshield, so I couldn't see. The power steering also failed. So I fought the car, trying to get back to the gas station at the corner so I could find a payphone. Yes, that's how old I am. But because I couldn't see, I missed the turn and ended up turning into an apartment complex. About this time, the cloud stopped and I could see again. Still no power steering. So I fought the car to do a U-turn so I could get back to the gas station point. At this point, the fire truck I had cut off turned into the apartment complex, full lights, and blocked me in. 2 huge firefighters got out of the truck holding fire extinguishers like beer cans. "Excuse me sir, did you know your van was on fire?" Turns out while I was cutting them off, I had been shooting flames out from under the passenger side of the van. They hit the lights, did a U-turn, and came back to me. The wave of heat wasn't from the lawnmower. They checked out the van and let me go. The cause turned out to be a damaged power steering line. It sprayed power steering fluid all over the exhaust manifold and caught fire. TLDR, cut off a fire truck while on fire. Got pulled over by the fire truck. Edit, added TLDR. Thanks for the silver. Former park ranger. First week in the job, we pull up and see a couple of kids smoking in their car with the windows down. The city has an ordinance against smoking on park property, but it is too petty to give them a ticket. We approach the car and they are visibly nervous. My FTO looks through the windows and sees a couple of beer cans in the car. Bingo. We get them out and start running their info. They are all underage but old enough to smoke cigarettes. My FTO asks them where the beer came from. The driver says he recycles. FTO laughs and begins to search the car. I'm finishing up running their info, and these guys are being really respectful. FTO finishes searching the cab and goes to open the trunk. All of a sudden I hear him bust out laughing. He is laughing so hard he can barely breathe. He waves me over to look at the trunk of the car, and it is level with crushed cans and bottles. My FTO said that he has heard that excuse for 20 years and this is the first time it was true. He walked up, uncuffed the driver and let him go. Edit. There were a lot of interesting questions in the comments, and I felt the need to answer a few of them. FTO field training officer. New officers are assigned a training officer out of the academy. The length of time they are assigned to an FTO varies by department. Handcuffed. In California and the US in general, cuff rights are very loose. The general rule of thumb is we can cuff you for officer safety if we have probable cause, PC, for a crime. In this situation, smoking in the park was all of the PC we need. Beer in car open container laws vary from state to state. California has some of the stricter laws where you can get a DUI if the keys are in the car and you are drinking. I have heard that you can get a DUI as a passenger, but I would have to look that up. Park ranger. The title of park ranger is very general. There are interpretive rangers who are there as historians, naturalists, and for park information. There are firefighter park rangers who go through full fire academies and drive fire trucks or brush trucks, pickup truck with a fire hose and water tank. There are safety officers who are essentially security officers that have the power to issue parking tickets. They will often be assigned to police officer rangers for force multiplication. When tacked onto a police officer ranger, they can perform most duties that a police officer can while under their direction. Then there are police officers. They either go through their department's own police academy or get added into other departments' police academy. Our department, City of Los Angeles, used LAPD and LA Sheriff's academies. Some departments allow the police officer rangers to carry firearms, some do not. Clarification: I was not a police officer. I was an emergency hire park ranger EHPR. At the time, the city had a severe shortage of officers and a huge homelessness problem in the parks. The City of Los Angeles voted to grant a handful of emergency positions to the department. As an EHPR, we went through security guard training, 837 power to arrest training, LAPD's dispatch school to get certified to use the CA's criminal databases, wildland fire school, low/high angle search and rescue school, and emergency medical technician, EMT, school. The appointment lasted 1 year, or as long as it took to go through full police backgrounds and get into a police academy. I worked as a safety officer for a few years, then as an emergency hire for 11 months. I cleared backgrounds but decided to move to the private sector a week before the academy. This was a personal decision, but influenced by the tension against law enforcement in 2015/2016 and the fact that our department did not arm police officer rangers, but demanded full police officer duties. I have tremendous respect for our police officers, and especially for the police officer rangers that are unarmed performing police duties. Those dudes have balls that clank. Point note, don't quote me on the legal stuff, it is likely I'm wrong. Popped a college kid for shitty driving and pulled 100 grams of weed off of him. Also, a 1-pound glass pipe shaped like a huge nail. No biggie. Also find weed under the other college kids in the car. Driver falls on the sword and tells me all of it is his and lets his friends walk free. I like this kid. Point. However, during the search we find packaged Addies in the cellophane of a cigarette pack with the top melted closed. Ask kid if has dealing Addies at school. Tell him I'm aware of the prescription pill epidemic. He says no and spins a huge yarn about how he only carries a few on him because has had his orange pill bottle stolen so many times. Kid seems like a pretty good dude. I decided to take the X-Files approach. Supervisor tells me pursue charges for dealing, blah blah blah. I tell the kid he has one chance to prove he's telling the truth. Point. Shows me the broken glass under his driver's seat from a vehicle burglary. Gotta do better. I follow behind him back to his dorm. He lets me in and shows me the busted footlocker he kept them in under his bed. Dunno. Kinda weak. Supervisor's telling me to hurry and drop the axe. Tell him to do better. He calls one of the soccer team assistants up and we meet him in the locker room. Shows me the little wooden locker which has a broken lock. Point. Assistant coach tells me they have replaced the lock on his cabinet 3 times. Campus security has numerous reports of medicine theft from this kid. Nice. I call supervisor up and tell him I have no grounds to pursue delivery charges. Poor bastard just kept getting his Adderalls jacked, and being the big dumb meatball he was, he started packaging them like that. I end up talking to his best friend. Breaking up a house party a couple months later. Friend tells me kid is a stand-up guy who only uses weed due to extreme anxiety. Totally believable from my interaction with him, and has never sold anything in his life. Friend thanked me and told me his buddy spoke well of me. Friend also tells me he had to drive his buddy to the hospital a few hours after I left from a panic attack due to the whole incident. Point. I felt bad for the kid. So now, whenever I see him smoking up in his car in the mall parking lot I just wave. Thanks for the gold. I'm honored, but it's not needed. Put it in a savings account. Money is a beach to get, so hold on to it. Point. If you have to part with it, donate it to St. Jude's Children Research Hospital. They do good shit there. Not a cop, and I'm so late to the party here that I doubt many will see, but here goes. I was this person for some to lucky cops, so it's the holiday season a few years ago. I work at a coffee shop at the time and go to a co-worker's New Year's ugly sweater party or some shit. Have a few drinks until 10 PM then switch to water. My one friend gets to talking to me about tea, cause we work with coffee and tea, gives me a tea bag in a plastic baggie. I put it in my pocket. 2 AM rolls around and I leave, but I'm tired as hell. I want to get home and get to sleep, so I'm blasting music to keep me awake and probably going a little too fast, but not drastically. So point. Anyway, the party lights kick on behind me and I pull over. We go through the questions. Where you coming from? Where you going? You been drinking? Doing anything else? I blow clean on the breathalyzer. I walk the line fine. Balance on one leg. Then one of the cops pats me down and reaches my pocket. Point. Him. Son. What do you have in your pocket? Me. Knowing how ridiculous I'm about to sound. It's tea. Officer. Him. About as dubious as you can expect. You expect me to believe you have tea in your pocket? Me. My friend gave it to me. At this point his partner looks to be trying not to laugh at the absurdity of this situation. The cop in front of me looks over his shoulder at his partner in a "you believe this guy" sort of way, then back to me. Point. Him. Get it out. He holds out his hand while I fumble around and withdraw the plastic baggie from my pants pocket, complete with a single serving of tea neatly labeled, and hand it to the suddenly bewildered officer. Him. Why the hell do you have tea in your pocket? He asks me. I like tea, officer. I respond in probably the most matter-of-fact way possible. How partner finally gives up on restraining his laughter. The other cop gives me the tea back and tells me to go home and sleep. I never could bring myself to try that tea. I still have it in the same bag on my shelf. Police officer here. 3 years ago, living in the station got a call about a ghost in someone's house. I wasn't the one on the phone, but apparently the person was hysterical and hard to understand. I arrived on the scene. This woman of about 40 was standing in her front yard. The house is upper middle class, pretty bland. She swears there is a ghost inside. The only reason we didn't disregard the call is because she claimed there was screaming in her attic. She claimed the ghost was doing it. I was supposed to make sure an animal wasn't stuck up there or something. She explains she has been hearing this screaming and bumping on the walls the past 2 days. She is the only one who lives there. No pets who could cause it. Neighbors are in vacation. So, of course, the logical explanation is a ghost. She was far too afraid to check the attic. So I head up there. It was full of cobwebs and musty, and of course the only light bulb didn't work. I take a step, and all of a sudden I hear banging and muffled yelling. Navigating with my flashlight, I head over to the source, a corner in the far back. There was a hobo there. His leg had fallen through the floor and was stuck, and he couldn't get out. He started crying tears of joy when I walked over, thanking me and asking for help simultaneously. I pull him out, trying to scratch his leg as little as possible, and lead him outside. After letting him stop and get some water, he told me he was just looking for a place to spend the night, and I felt like he had gotten punished enough for his trespass. I asked if he needed anything else before I sent him on his way. Right when he opened his mouth to speak, I realized that he was a 50-foot tall, grey leviathan from the Paleolithic era. He said, "Well, could I have about $3.50?" I responded, "I ain't giving you no $3.50, Loch Ness monster. Get out ta here." Looking defeated, he began to make his way to the nearest lake. Okay, so legit answer. One night I'm out working, and as I go down the street, fairly nice middle class area surrounded by some high crime neighborhoods, around midnight I see a dude on a bike, no lights on, pulling a lawnmower behind him on a rope. I immediately flip a 180 and light him up. Recognize the guy as a local homeless dude with some prior burglary/theft arrests. I walk up and just open with, "Dude, come on." Guy holds his hands out and swears he didn't steal the lawnmower. Claims someone just gave it to him. I ask who, and he doesn't know a name. So I demand he tell me where to find said lawnmower owner. The directions he gave were literally go that way a bit, then right at a stop sign, and take one of those side streets that way. It's about halfway down a street, at a house that has a pickup and a car in the driveway. By this point backup had arrived, so I leave him in the presence of backup and drive off in search of his mythical donor of lawn equipment. I made a decent guess as to the first turn, then flipped a mental coin as to which of the next 3 side streets he would have gone down. I pick the second of the 3 streets and start down it. Every other faking house has a truck and car combo. There must have been a dozen houses that matched the description. Halfway down, I see an average looking house and go, I'll try this one. After all, it's midnight and this is a wild goose chase. Go up, ring the doorbell. Middle-aged dude comes to the door. "Hello sir, have you been giving away lawnmowers to random sketchy homeless guys at midnight today?" Yes. As a matter of fact, he had. Homie Arwana goes on to complain to me that his wife was upset as his continual inability to get the mower running and had ordered him with some severity to remove the mower from the house or face the consequences. He pushed it to the curb right as homeless guy rode by, and the latter had asked and received his permission to take it. I drove back in shock and amazement, apologized to homeless guy, and sent him on his way. A few months later we ran into each other at a nearby gas station, and he told me it turned out just to need a new spark plug, and that he had gotten it running again before going on to sell it for $150 to someone. 4 years after, whenever I would run into him, he would always make sure to remind me of the money he made from selling that stolen lawnmower. Laugh out loud. Former US Coast Guard and actually did law enforcement. For those unfamiliar, the Carolinas in the States, and especially Wrightsville Beach, Myrtle Beach, New Topsail, Lockwood's Folly along the NC/S seaboard are overflowing with drunk and/or stupid boaters during the summers. Especially with UNCW nearby, drunk college kids on the water everywhere doing reckless shit. BWI's illegal charters, faking around outside of the channel, cutting boats, speeding, ignoring no wake zones, and even the odd drug trafficking/illegal firearms trafficking charges. Suffice it to say, combined with hurricane season, we were quite busy from May to September. One free afternoon hour gets a call out on channel 16, like 911 for boaters, from a captain calling in a pontoon boat that has flipped and 20 young, intoxicated males in the water. We arrive on scene with another 47 feet from a nearby station, and are fishing these drunk idiots from the water. They pack 24 people on board a 14-person pontoon boat, and of course it flipped. As we're pulling them out, literally all of them were drunkenly threatening us with their daddy's law firm. It was like a shitty 90s teen MTV rom-com come to life. We just rolled our eyes, zip-tied them, didn't pack enough cuffs, and 90% of them were combative/drunk, even seeing the pistols on our hips/rifles/shotgun slings. Turns out it was an entire frat of future lawyers studying at Ellen whose fathers were all lawyers as well. Still didn't save them from the local US attorney and reckless operation of a boat, BWI, unlicensed captain, etc. point charges. Still was surreal with dozens of drunk 20-year-old dudes wailing and telling us their daddy would sue us. Don't even get me started on jet scare stories. I'm a deputy cop, but we work the county/unincorporated areas, me and a few sector partners, second smallest county in the state, fourth highest population, so we have a lot of deputies in a tiny area. We're hanging out at a gas station at about 3 AM to get some coffee and a snack, outside chit-chatting waiting for the next call to come in. Guy pulls up in a pewter colored Oldsmobile with a hubcap missing, hops out of the car and starts pumping gas. One of us noticed he had a gun holster on his right side, but couldn't see a gun because his shirt was over it. Us being an open carry state, no big deal. However, the gun was concealed by the shirt, so we just stopped to talk with him. Explained to him that he can't conceal the gun. He said no problem, it was a mistake from him getting out of the car. Understandable point. Other partner looks in the passenger side of the car, and there's a fist-sized sarin wrap bag of white powder with multiple $20 bills underneath it sitting on the passenger seat right in plain view. Now to us, a gun, large size bag of white powder, good bit of money underneath, appears to be drug related. Start asking the guy, like, yo, what is this crap, and why is it just on your seat? He says, oh, it's powdered wall plaster. I just got it from my grandma. It's 3 AM at a gas station. I mean, come on. We are cops, so by all means we aren't the smartest people on the planet, but we ain't stupid. Or so we thought. Point turns out the dude is 100% telling the truth. Gun was legal and legally obtained. His only history we could dig up was speeding tickets and a simple affray charge from years ago. Grandma gave him the plaster so he could fix a hole in his wall, and he didn't have cash to buy it himself, so she spotted him some moolah. Point needless to say, he's got a funny story to tell, and I guess now I do too. He was super understanding and even himself said it was hilarious because it absolutely looked like pure cocaine, and it looked like a huge amount, at least for lowly street deputies. Throwaway, for obvious reasons. Also, not a cop, I live, and this happened, in Canada. This is important for building the scene of a long barren highway, snow on the trees, and a grey straight stretch of road that only gets that grey when it's so cold the road salt is frozen. Point I have colitis. The ulcerative kind. The kind that lets you explode bloody fesses and mucus while showering, and it washes down the drain like a Sunday morning pee. The kind that is incredibly painful when held in. I was holding it in when my adventure began. Point I was racing home, well over the speed limit. At about 150 kilometers, 100 plus miles per hour, trying not to ruin my car's upholstery. My left leg was pressing so hard on the floor of the car it was trembling. I learned that I can constrict my offices much better if I use other muscles to cheer them on. I see a terrifying sight ahead. A lonely prowling police SUV was cruising in front of me. I normally would have slowed down and remained well behind the officer. But this time, I had an unholy demon clawing at my insides. Its fingernails ripping painfully through my engorged intestines. I kept up my speed, as I was a panicked man. Close to madness as expected, the police lights came on, and the siren wailed. This pulled me out of my trance, and into a shocked reality. I've never gotten a speeding ticket before and I froze. The adrenaline shattered the field of pain, and I was able to pull over and address the situation. After sheepishly handing over my papers, the officer asked me, why were you driving so fast? Ann. I replied, officer, I'm so sorry, I really have to go to the bathroom. I have colitis. The officer didn't look impressed and made an offer. Is that so? If you can go right now in the ditch, I'll let you go. I literally leapt at the offer. I scrambled out of the car and exposed my butt to the freezing cold air, and nothing. I gave a little push. Nothing. I didn't understand, but apparently adrenaline and freezing cold can hinder things. Then it happened immediately following a cough caused by the cold air. My butt was unleashing steaming foul spray of blood and feces that would make a zombie flee. It was a horizontal fountain of stench and terror. I wiped myself with some snow and cleaned up my inner thighs. I looked up to see a genuinely concerned man with a pale look of shock. The officer had removed his hat and, while clutching it to his chest, handed me my papers and let me go. TLDR. Cop pulled me over. Didn't believe I had to poo. When I did, he let me go. Added obligatory, not a cop. Australian here. We have this thing where police close off roads to do breath tests and drug testing. Super normal and stuff. Anyways, I was on my way back from work and was doing a detour to assist a pharmacy. I was transferring some stock. I get pulled over. So random breath test. Pass with flying colors naturally. And then came the big question. Do you have any drugs in here? I had never been asked that before, but it is a pretty dodgy area I'm in. I look at the pile of stock next to my seat and looked back at the officer and awkwardly said, maybe I have to drive. Forward and off to the side. 2 more officers come over once I'm parked and ask, what drugs do you have in your possession? I felt really dumb and embarrassed here. I told them in a frantic voice, I'm on my way back from work. I work in pharmacy. I'm transferring some stock to this other pharmacy and I don't really know what I have in that box in the seat. The officers kept a straight face, but I can kind of tell that they were thinking that I was full of it. They open the box of stock and the first they see is a large packet of incontinent pads, and then toothbrushes and some painkillers, and then, oh shit, benzos. They sell on the street for good amount, and of course they were right at the bottom, as if I was trying to hide it. Also there were some cancer medications and whatnot. I showed them the invoice and they had to call my pharmacy first. Big surprise, they were close. They called my boss, who casually greeted me with screaming kids in the background on the phone and tried to reassure the officers who were talking to him that it was a legit transfer. Lastly, they called the pharmacy I was on my way to. The pharmacist in charge was new and also had a strong accent. Eventually, I don't know what happened, but they got the right amount of verbal confirmation as well as the invoice and decided to dismiss me. As stressful as it all was, I sit back in the car ready to go when one of the officers comes to my window with a big ass grin and tell me, remember to take good care of them pads. All but the incontinence pads were packed away, and I smiled and put the seatbelt over it. The man laughed and I drove off to the pharmacy. I was one with an excuse. I was 16 years, been 10 years it happened. I was experiencing drugs for the first times, and this time was ecstasy. I was with my friend and we were walking outside tripping our balls. We like at least 10 kilometers far from out town, so we began to walk on the small highway. We started walking and laughing our ass off when we saw a cop turning on his lights and pulled over. I immediately hid my little baggies of ecstasy. There was like 4 in my underwear. So the cops ask, what are we doing in the middle of the highway at 1 AM? My friend was so freaked he could barely talk, so I said, we are lost officer. I just know my house is towards that way. He looks at me like, what the fuck, and says he'll give us a ride home. At first we said no, we are okay, but they began to be suspicious, so we just went into the car. It was like a 10 minutes ride, but it felt like hours. I remember my friend staring at his hands like faking out of the planet. Arrived at my house, the cops ask if my parents are awake. I said no, my parents would have actually flipped the fuck out seeing me high like that, and then he said go on. He didn't even search our pockets or tell my family. We went immediately in the backyard, which I said this is where I enter my house. He stayed a couple of minutes in his car and then left. Obviously the cops know we were high. I think they just wanted us to be safe. Since that day I've never touched that stuff ever again. It was such a shitty trip. Posting for the cop that pulled me over because I don't think he uses Reddit. My girlfriend and I are in my car stopped at a light with the windows up when I notice classical music. Immediately, I roll down the windows to see who's blasting that sheet loud enough for me to hear in my closed car, and it comes in just as it swells, and we determine that it's coming from the neighborhood next to us. Naturally, I turn in to see who's throwing this absolute rager. I signal, but, I otherwise without warning just yeet into this place, and the officer behind me, whom I'm just now noticing, follows me in. Oh, he wants us, I say as I notice the no outlet sign near the entrance. The music had faded by this point because of course, dumbass, it was a car in front of you playing the music. No one would be partying to that. So I pull into a cul-de-sac and try to turn around, but the cop is parked at the head of the street. He lights me up and pulls up to me and, after ID and reg, basically asks me what I'm doing because he ran my play and knows I don't live here. Well, officer, I heard loud classical music and I wanted to see where the awesome party was. He's dumbfounded. He says to me, okay, look, I don't not believe, but this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So I'm going to pull over there, don't go anywhere, and get out, and you're going to tell me that story again. I do. He's laughing by this point. After a pause, he says, I just want you to know that this is the most absurd story I've ever heard. And it's completely true? Yes sir. Alright, now have a good day. There's a great Forensic Files episode that fits this question. A guy picks up a hitchhiker, gets into an altercation with him, and manages to drive off again without him. The driver is shaken by the incident and decides to drive around a bit before going home, which is only a mile up the road. By the time he has cooled down enough to go home, the same hitchhiker, who had no idea beforehand where the driver lived, has managed to rap and slain the driver's mother. The driver calls the cops and explains how the hitchhiker he'd gotten into a fight with earlier walked a mile to his home and murdered his mother as revenge for not driving him all the way. Cops of course don't buy this for a plethora of reasons. How did the hitchhiker know where the driver lived, and how did he make it there on foot? Cops even doubted the existence of the hitchhiker and called bullshit on the entire story, although driver was never charged with anything for lack of evidence. Well, 10 years later, turns out the driver's story was true. Also turns out that after he kicked the hitchhiker out of his vehicle, the hitchhiker walked a mile up the road where he planned to rob a random house. He picked the only house that had their lights off. Unbeknownst to him, the driver who had just kicked him out of his vehicle minutes earlier lived there with his mother. Just a random crime and a bizarre set of coincidences too far-fetched to be believable. But as they say, truth is stranger than fiction. Not a cop, but I was on the other end of such an encounter. I didn't drink alcohol at all until I was like 25. Never. I was 18, and some friends and I went out to Brewster's ice cream for, well, ice cream. My friend, David, got like a whole pint of rum raisin and ended up somehow spilling like all of it in the backseat floorboard. It had this really pungent awful imitation rum scent that just filled the car. I thought, whatever, I'll clean it out tomorrow. After I dropped him off at his place at like midnight, I started the 30-minute drive back home. One of my headlights was out, and a cop ended up pulling me over in the parking lot of a Holiday Inn. When I rolled the window down, the smell must have hit him in the face, and he immediately asked how many drinks I'd had. I told him the truth, that I hadn't had anything to drink, like ever. He told me he could smell it on me. And again I told him the truth, that my friend had spilled a bunch of rum raisin ice cream in my car, knowing this sounded like the stupidest, most bullshit excuse for the smell of alcohol. He didn't even respond, just hit the button on his shoulder mounted radio mic, and said we got a insert offense number here. He's denying it, and told me to get out of the car. He didn't have a breathalyzer, so he did a field sobriety test on me, having me touch my nose with eyes closed, walk a straight line, say the alphabet backward, etc. In the middle of this, a crowd of like 80 suit and gown wearing people spill out of the front doors of the Holiday Inn, and when they see me getting field tested they all just stand there and watch. I passed the test fine, of course, cause I was stone sober, but that didn't convince the cop. He called for someone to bring him a breathalyzer and we stand there awkwardly for like 20 to 30 minutes, waiting. Car shows up, and I tell the new guy I know this sounds like bullshit, but this is all over some rum raisin ice cream. I don't drink. Eye rolls. I take the breathalyzer and pass, of course. But this doesn't convince them. The breathalyzer must be wrong. So they call for another cop to bring a breathalyzer again. Wait half an hour, and the cop shows up with 2 breathalyzers. There's now 3 cop cars blocking me into this Holiday Inn parking lot, and it must look to all our spectators like I'm in some serious shit. At this point I've gotten cocky, and I'm telling the cops shit like, watch this. I bet you any amount of money that the reading on the next breathalyzer will be dead zero. How much do you want to bet me? That annoys them, as it should have. But anyway, I kill it with the other 2 breathalyzers, to the cops' astonishment. At that point they decide they have to just buy my bullshit story. But they end up, somehow, writing me like 3 different tickets, all with different charges, for having my headlight out, I think just to get me for something after kind of embarrassing them with my evidently true bullshit story. I went group camping with my son a few months ago. We were only about a half hour from home. Well, idiot me forgets to pack pillows. Now when I go camping I often forget pillows and I just stuff some clothes in my sleeping bag sleeve, but my son was having trouble sleeping. My wife calls, and I mention I forgot the pillows. Like a champ she offers to meet me halfway with the pillows. I leave my son with my friends at the campsite and head off to get the pillows. As we get close she calls me looking for a place to meet. She says, okay, here's a nice inn right by the parkway, I'll pull in here. About 30 seconds later I approach, and the parking lot is lit up with police lights. On speakerphone I say, "Ho, what's going on there?" And I hear her saying, "What's the problem, officer? I wasn't doing anything wrong. Can you tell me what I was doing wrong?" She sounds tired and stressed, and is not giving off a great vibe. I hear the officer telling her she was driving erratically, which she most certainly was, because she was trying to find a place to meet me. I pull into the parking lot, and let me say it does not look as nice inside the gate as it did from the road. In fact it looks extremely sketchy. My wife starts telling the officer that she's in this seedy motel at midnight because she's bringing pillows to her husband. I don't even believe her at this point. I pipe in on the speakerphone to tell the officer that I'm the pillowless husband and I will be approaching from the rear. I grab the pillows, turn around, get in my car, and leave. It took every ounce of restraint I have to not slip her a $100 bill while receiving the pillows. Epilogue. Cop was cool and let her off with a warning. Obligatory not a cop, but I have a decent story. I used to be a snake and reptile breeder and rescuer. Well, a friend of mine who was a male exotic dancer had decided to purchase a snake from me. Our schedules rarely matched up, so I offered to go to the city after he was finished work one night, deliver the snake, terrarium, feeders, and help him set it up. No big deal. I'm a night owl, so a 3 AM drive is not a big deal for me. So the night comes, and I'm on my way. Out of freaking nowhere I hear a siren and see lights. I pull to the side, assuming they will fly past me. I wasn't speeding, no lights out, so I thought nothing of it. Well, I'll be damned. He pulls in right behind me. He approaches my van. Police. Do you know why I pulled you over? Me. No. Police. That was incredibly reckless. You nearly killed me on that lane change. I'm thinking. I used my signal, but didn't see anyone else on the road. It's freaking 3 AM. Me. What? Police. You nearly killed me. Me. What? Where? When? How? The officer then explains he was in the next lane over, and I just about ran him off the road when I changed lanes. Me, officer, I'm sorry, but I didn't see you. Maybe if you had your headlights on, I would have seen your black car in the next lane. Point officer looks back and sees his driver's on, but lack of headlights. Oh, well, where are you going in such a rush? Can I see your papers? Me, I'm going to deliver a snake to a friend. Point police, at 3 AM. Me, yup, proceeds to pull my purse from the passenger seat. Pass the officer a tied off pillowcase from the purse. Can you hold this while I dig for my license, please? Police, sir. Screaming wildly and tosses the pillowcase. What the hell is in there? It moved. Me, oh, that's just the snake I'm delivering. Point he went absolutely pale, ran back to his car and drove off. After turning on his headlights, I hopped out, grabbed my snake, and continued on my way. Obligatory, not a cop, but the person the cops pulled over. So, I have an immense interest in science, and, before doing it, I took classes to become a chemical engineer. Periodic table, shower curtain, the whole 9 yards. I bought gallium online, because it is safe, and also super amazing. It melts at body temperature. This is a metal that you can cool and make a metal spoon in a mold with, and then melt in hot water. Super cool, right? Well, it was in my glove box, and I was in a town I knew the police knew was known for drugs and also for drunkies. It was late, and I was exhausted as I had just finished a 13-hour day as a chef. Went out to get beer, had one drink at a bar next to the gas station where I picked up a 30 rack for the next 2 weeks, so I don't need to pay bar prices, etc. It was like 11:30 on a Friday night. I get pulled over, and the cops think I'm drunk because I'm red-eyed and tired af. They ask me if I have drank, and I said I had one beer about 38 minutes ago, but I worked a 13-hour day. I'm however functional, and on my way home, 3 blocks from here, they get me out of the car and do a field test. I ace the field test. They search my car and find the gallium, which has melted, unknown to me, in my glove box, covering a bunch of things, including a mechanical pencil that I have had in there for years. They hold this plastic bag filled with melted gallium and pieces of mechanical pencil and just look at me, officer. I know what this looks like. I'm in school as a chemical engineer, and that is gallium. If you were to Google gallium and watch the video of the melting spoon, you will understand that, due to the heat of the day, this substance, which looks sketchy and like metal, melted into that mechanical pencil, but is actually both safe and super cool. Unfortunately, I had it in my glove box, and you pulled me over. The police officers disappear into their car, while I stand with my hands on the driver's side door for about the time it takes to watch a YouTube video of the melting spoon. And they get out, laughing, and they have a good night. Point I hope I brought them joy when this situation scared them from the beginning. Point edit. Gallium is a transitional metal and is immediately one space down from aluminum and is often a byproduct of aluminum mining. Not a cop, but once on Halloween I was stopped by police who wanted to search me for paraphernalia and whatnot. It was in Santa Cruz, California, and my friends and I had just left a concert to go grab some pizza. The streets were crawling with people in costume, and I was dressed as Quail Man from the cartooned out Funny. We were in a parking lot smoking some joints when a troop of them, about 5 or 6, showed up shining lights in our faces. Cop saw me with the joint before I could toss it, so he told me he was going to search me. I was having fun and wasn't mad, so I complied with his directions. Because of this he was being pretty nice, but still had me in an awkward stance with my hands behind my back. He was trying to check my pockets, but since I was wearing underwear over my shorts he was having trouble. So I asked, would you like for me to take my underwear off, sir? He kind of chuckled, and so did his buddies, and said, no, that's alright. Do you having anything illegal on you? I told him that around my neck under my shirt was a small pouch with like 4 joints in it. He told me okay, go ahead and remove the pouch. Slowly, I did as he asked and handed it over. As another cop was putting on rubber gloves to check out the pouch, he asked if there was anything else inside. I said, yeah, just a small rock. The smile left his face as soon as I said it, as did the rest of them, and their demeanors became real serious. They removed the joints and found the rock, and they all took turns looking at it. I couldn't see what was going on from my point of view, but soon heard laughing as the first guy came back to me saying, "So you actually meant a rock? Like a pebble?" Me, oblivious to the situation, replied, "Oh yeah, why? What did you think I meant? TLDR, cop let me go," after realizing my rock was for sentimental value and not for consuming. He took the weed though. Not a cop. Last year, I was taken in for questioning by the Chinese anti-drug smuggling task force because a package with my name and home address and phone number and a metric ton of ecstasy arrived from Germany. It's sort of my package, which is to say, it was intentionally sent to me, and that the sender got my address from me. Why it happened or exactly who, it seems to be an order of magnitude too expensive for the psychotic nut job in Oregon who hates my guts, but I don't know of anyone else I've pissed off to that level. Remains a mystery to this day. But, yeah, I signed for that package, took the package, and acknowledged the package as mine. I honest to goodness thought, when I'd given my address to the sender, that I was chatting with someone else. I thought it was a birthday present. The detective identifies himself, shows me his badge, asks if I'm me, if I speak Chinese, if it's my package. Yes. Translator: of course it's mine. We have some suspicions regarding contraband. Do you know what's in the package? It's a birthday present. Well yeah, but what is in the package? It wouldn't be a very good present if I knew what it was. Okay, what do you think is in the package? Most of the yummies my friend knows I like would go bad during shipping, and it's not a very large package. I'm guessing chocolate, and that's how I started 34 hours of being one of the most confusing individuals they likely ever dealt with. I'm not a cop, I'm the person who had a lame excuse. On my way across the border to Canada I had a shit ton of stuff in my car. I was living out of my car at the time, and because of this, I was searched. I knew I had nothing, so I wasn't scared until an officer comes back in holding a tiny container full of a light grey powder that was taped shut. It looked like the sketchiest thing ever. He asked me what it was, and I honestly had no clue. Literally the day before this, I had just ended a relationship with a rather eccentric person who would collect random things as keepsakes. So I told him that I think it's sand, but I had really no clue what it was. I gave them the typical bullshit response that I've seen countless people give officers on shows like Cops and Live PD. I knew how bullshit it sounded as it came out of my mouth, which made me seem so much sketchier. They put me into a separate questioning room and asked me what other illegal drugs I had in my car. I told them nothing, so the officer says he's going to run the stuff through a scanner. As I waited I was shaking, because I did have quite a few people in my car over the last few months, and even though I had just cleaned my car I figured there might be a slim possibility that someone had left their drugs in my car. After the longest 10 minutes of my life he comes back and sternly says it appears to be sand. When I went to get my keys back the lady at the desk obviously felt very bad for me. I must have seemed like such a shit show, which I kind of was, because I decided to drive 7 hours to go to Canada on a whim, because that's how I wanted to deal with my breakup. I've since learned that taking a day trip into Canada is not something you can just do without seriously double checking that you have nothing at all in your car that is questionable. Obligatory: I was not the cop, but the guy who gave the excuse to the cop had recently had hardships in life, responded to it by drinking a lot, was living in Buddy's garage. Since I just broke up with girlfriend I was living with, at night I'd go out to my truck and listen to music and drink. Didn't want to do it around my friend, his wife and his kids, and I also lazily stashed all my empty bottles behind the seats of my truck. So I had like a treasure trove of recyclables back there. I'm much better now, by the way. This was years ago. I was basically living in that truck. I honestly did not drive it. Drunk, but if you looked at that stash behind the seat you'd have bet your whole paycheck that I was a regular drunk driver. One Saturday afternoon I go out to the grocery store, buy a 6-pack, throw it in the passenger seat, and start driving back to where I'm staying. It is raining. Deer happens. I swerve. Shoulder kept straight. My truck flips and wraps around a tree. Pretty serious crash. I miraculously survive unscathed. but the 6-pack doesn't. A few of the bottles had broken or popped open. The whole interior, including me and my clothes, are now sprayed in beer. The stench absolutely reeking. At first I freak out and think I'm gonna be in deep shit. I was pretty shell shocked at the time, but then I realized I was totally sober and had nothing to hide. Fast forward a half an hour, I got this hardest cracker North Carolina state trooper giving me this military style sobriety test. He did not believe me at all. Once he found that stash of like 40 beer can/bottles, he was totally convinced he had a DUI in the bag. Good Christian guy, pretty upset at me about putting his small rural community in danger. I passed the test and blew a .00 whilst absolutely reeking of booze. He was genuinely surprised, had been a cop for decades, and told me he'd never seen an innocent person look so guilty. That was a shitty day, except the part where I survived. That part was good. Hello. Cop here. I was on routine patrol near a bunch of fast food places. A car comes barreling out of one of the fast food drive-thrus and almost hits me. My response was very measured. Hello shit. Damn, that was close. The car then starts swerving all over the road, but doing the speed limit. It's noon. Pull the guy over, start talking to him, run him out. Guy has never had so much as a parking ticket, but he's slurring his words so bad I can't understand him. He's faking hammered drunk or so I thought. Now I've seen plenty of DUI like medical conditions, crashes, diabetics, chemotherapy, things that at first looks like DUI point, but he said no to all those questions. Then I ask about prescription meds. He said he's just got back from Africa and takes anti-malaria medication. Lol, okay bro. Sure. Me and my partner looked at each other and just started laughing. So that's the worst excuse I've heard in a long time. But he goes on, explains some more, lets me see the bottle. A drug comes out. We call on pharmacologist and holy shit. This guy's actually on some umbrella corp level meds. He was telling the truth the whole time. We explained to him that technically he could still get a DUI and he can't drive on these meds. I apologized for not believing him at first and explained that every single drunk driver offers these kind of excuses, and this is the whole reason we ask a ton of questions to confirm what you're saying is true. Point to clarify because read it. Yes, I was frustrated at him in the beginning. He never knew it though. He had no memory of nearly hitting me and I was very nice to him the whole time. Not a cop. I was around 18 and was on my way to a funeral. My older brother had just had a baby, but the baby had died due to complications. My job was to pick up my other brother in the next city over because he was in a rehab program. I had picked some family friends and got lost trying to find the rehab center. This was before phones had maps, by the way. I start freaking out because it's getting late and the only people missing in the funeral is us. I'm on the highway going 95 trying to make it on time. I don't remember the exact day, but it was a weekday and past rush hour, so the road was empty. I see the cop lights and freak out because I definitely didn't have time for the stop. I had to go. The cop stops me and I explain that I'm on my way to a funeral and that I got lost and that I'm late. He looks at me, brother and friends who are all dressed in formal black clothing and says, well now you're gonna be later, and proceeds to find reasons to give me tickets. He begins with one for speeding, one for my brother not having a seatbelt, one for not finding my insurance or tag info. Then the guy looks at my freaking Tinsan, says that he thinks they are too dark and has to check to see if they are legal. The car was a old car that came with the tints and I had nothing to do with it. I start bawling through all of this just thinking you can't take back a funeral. He purposefully held me up and gave me all those tickets too. Honestly, I don't know why. I don't know what the heck was wrong with that cop, but he was not a good person. Worst part is I think he believed me. So I'm on the other side, not a cop. But this was a funny little story. So it's around Christmas time. Me being a jovial oddball, I decide to wear a Santa hat. Me and a buddy of mine decided to stop by his uncle's house. Point, I've never met his uncle before. Also his uncle is in the military, keep in mind. So we get to his house and my friend realizes the door is locked. I can't remember what we needed from the house, only that was of utmost importance. So he does what anyone else does when they don't have a key. find a way in. So we had the bright idea, in broad daylight, to go through an unlocked window. We pull the screen off, shimmy the window down, voila. He gets in. So as I'm trying to put the screen back up, lo and behold, his uncle shows up. And there I am, in a jacket and a Santa hat, holding a window screen. In the middle of the ghetto point, I stare at him like deer in the headlights, as he just yells, "What the fuck are you doing?" I frantically try to act as innocent as possible, and say, "Oh no, sir, I was just putting it back." "Excuse me?" Thank heavens my friend comes back to vouch for me. Cut to maybe 15 to 20 minutes later, we are talking it over, and chilling in the house. Suddenly there are knocks at the door. The cops were called by a neighbor about 2 guys breaking into a house, one wearing a Santa hat. And there I am, dumbfounded with a Santa hat. 3 squad cars and 2 K9s arrived. After a few minutes of explaining and them looking through the house until the story checks out, thankfully they left with very little quarrels. Funny enough, the uncle told the cops, "You're out your mind knocking on my door like that." I got PTSD. If I had seen your dog, I'm not sure what would happen. One cop took that a little personal, but ultimately nothing become of that point. That was quite a day. A few years ago, a good friend visited us for a few days. He had moved to China and got married there, but still comes back to Europe twice a year to visit friends and family. Anyway, while I was at work, had an important presentation, and could not take the day free, but my wife was able to. They were planning to prepare dinner together with my wife, a traditional Chinese dish. His wife is nice, but she is incredibly loud, and has such a piercing voice, that makes you wish you were on the opposite side of the world. Seriously, I would almost prefer to sit down to a concert of males scratching on a chalkboard. At the same time, she is so tiny that you wonder where the voice actually comes from. So they are preparing food with the windows open. A neighbor walks by and hears screams, and a voice with an Asian accent saying in a frantic voice, "Don't worry, it's dead." Then she hears loud blows against the wall, followed by screams of a woman in agony. I drive home, and while I'm about to open the door, flashlights are directed at me, so many that I barely can see anything. After I adjusted to the light, I see about 8 cops in Special Forces uniform, heavily armed, with bulletproof vests and helmets. 2 of them look very young and nervous, which doesn't help in calming me down. One finally asks what I'm doing, and I just reply, "I'm coming home from work." They want to know how many women live in the building. I reply, "Just my wife," which doesn't help to improve the situation. They tell me to call her out. I do as asked, and after calling her loudly about 3 times, looking at the nervous cops getting even more nervous by every passing second, and exchanging nervous looks, she replies and comes to the door happily. The cops are obviously confused and ask her if everything is alright, which she confirms. At this moment, the wife of our friend arrives at the door as well to see what is going on, and says in her shrieking voice, "Oh hello officers, are you invited to the party as well?" Eventually everything is cleared up. While cooking, she was mashing the food in a huge bowl, which was responsible for the sounds the neighbor heard. The woman in agony was his wife, enjoying cooking and talking loudly, which she always does. My wife invited the cops inside, and she even packed them some food. They looked hungry and happy to get some of the food they prepared. She always cooks far too much. 20 people could be served without a problem, so it ended up being a good coincidence. Normally we have to freeze a part or it and give away the rest to friends and family. They apologized several times, promised to talk to the neighbor, and warn her not to make such high emergency calls without a real reason, and left. We still laugh about it with our friend. It was such a surreal situation, all the more keeping in mind that in Central Europe it's very uncommon to see cops in full armor in such a situation, much less a whole squad. The funny thing is, with him, we always had such weird experiences since growing up. He's like a magnet for unusual situations, the kind of that you keep telling to friends and family years after. Good times. Obligatory not a cop but. So my friend's dad is a cop, and used to tell this story at any get together. As a younger officer he was working highway enforcement, but as a city cop it was basically just getting called to car accidents by highway patrol. So he gets a call one day for an accident involving a semi and small car. Immediately expects at least one fatality. He arrives on scene and the semi is pulled off to the side and he can see the car wedged under the back of the trailer. Talks with the truck driver and he informs him the car had somehow ended up under the trailer and there was no way the guy survived. As my friend's dad is walking back he sees donuts scattered all over the highway, laughs at the coincidence, and continues on assuming it came from the semi. He gets to the car and the driver's side is crushed. He can't see anything. So he walks to the other side and sees a body in the passenger seat. Gets further up and the passenger turns their head, shaking profusely and says hello. He almost cheats himself because he thought the guy was dead. Checks him out and gets him help. Turns out the guy was on donut duty for a big office meeting that day. He spilled coffee on his lap, which made him swerve, and he ended up going under the trailer of this semi. The impact and the way he was leaning made him fly into the passenger seat and the semi's tires ran straight over the driver's side of the cab. So this guy survives and is sitting there with a box of donuts after a near-death experience. Looks up at my friend's dad and asks if he wants one. He did. Not a cop, but I was on the other side of the story. When I was still a student, I was playing rollerplay games late at night, like 2 to 3 am, with friends, and when they left I walked them back to the split point where everyone goes in a different direction. As usual, we stayed there until we finished our conversation, and sometimes it took like 1 hour, so we were here. 3 teenagers speaking under a lamppost at 3 am, with one of us having a backpack. At this time, a car of cop drives next to us, and we say for fun, I'm so damn sure they turned back to meet us. Well, they did. There was 3 cops in the car, and each of them stood in front of each of us, asking us what we were doing here. We explained the situation, saying we were just chatting after a game. They asked me what I had in my pockets. I answered, nothing except my keys. Can you show us? Yeah, sure. Turn my pockets inside out, showing my keys and nothing else was there. They ask the second, the same, and he say the same, nothing except my keys. Same goes on. He shows he has nothing except his keys. Then they turn to the friend with the backpack. What do you have in there? Nothing except my keys. We, the teens, all laugh then, and the cops look like you think it's funny. He then proceeds to open the backpack and lo and behold, there was only his keys inside. We were joking at that moment, saying we are the sect of keys. They told us to leave. They left. We stayed and laughed about that situation for at least half an hour. So I had this offender when I was a probation agent. My report days were on Tuesdays. If you didn't make your report day you were getting a home visit on Wednesday. So this dude fails to show up. So I go to his house the next day ready to be all what the fuck. So I go to his house and speak to his roommates. And they're like, dude, he's sick for real. I'm like, he better be in bed with a bucket between his legs. And they're like, no, he's in the hospital. So I'm like, well, he better be dead then. Well, I call the hospital. He's not dead, but he is in a coma. The nurse wouldn't say anything to me because of HIPAA. So I called back 30 minutes later and well, I didn't say I was a doctor, but I may have implied I worked downstairs in pathology. I have a lot of medical training, and I know people that worked in that hospital, so I was able to name drop the slang term of the building and imply I was downstairs. The charge nurse opened right up. So anyway, the guy had septicemia, and he was probably going to die. Well, I ran into him at the courthouse. He didn't die, but he sure as hell should have. His injection site got infected. He was shooting meth. That was his rock bottom. That injection spread to within inches of his heart. I stayed on his faking ass for another year. I basically allowed him to smoke marijuana so that he would eat and put on weight. They were feeding him basically just sugar water and whatever else they feed coma patients. He finished probation successfully and drug free, aside from the weed I guess. But that's a humble. I didn't really bother with that if they were paid up and doing what they were supposed to do. My dad is a retired police officer. At the time of this story, his personal car was a Dodge Dart. To set the scene, you have to understand what this ugly car looked like. It had a black hard shell top and was the color of, well, what can best be described as rusty purple. It was the most hideous car, and we'd never seen its equal. but it was a car and it was, usually, reliable. So my dad is driving home from work one evening. He still has his uniform on, but has a button-up shirt over the uniform. A detour sign on an overpass. Has my father drive through a neighborhood to get to the highway. As he rolls up to a stop sign, his car stalls all of a sudden. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees a guy running full speed at him with a huge lead pipe over his head. My dad instinctively reaches for his weapon. Problem is, the seat belt is in the way. He fumbles at the seat belt as the guy is a few feet away. Just as the guy is about to swing the pipe, he stops. He looks closer at my dad and says, "Oh, sorry, wrong guy." My dad thinks, "No shit, wrong guy." As the guy turns to walk away, my father jumps out of his car and identifies himself as a police officer. My father is concerned about why he was targeted. Is this guy targeting cops? Is he just waiting for people to stop at the stop sign? Is he a psychopath? What the hell? The guy drops the lead pipe and starts apologizing. Lead pipe guy says he was waiting to beat the hell out of a guy who is having sex with lead pipe guy's girlfriend. He heard that the guy drives a purple Dodge Dart. My dad is not buying it. In the 10 years that he has owned this used car, he's never seen another Dodge Dart in this shitty rusty purple color. He reads, lead pipe guy has writes and calls for backup since, well, my dad can't drive him back to headquarters in a stalled car. A patrol car arrives, and as my dad is putting lead pipe guy into the car, lead pipe guy yells, "There he is. There he is." Sure enough, slowly driving down the road is the doppelganger of my father's car, a Dodge Dart in the same shitty rusty purple. The only difference? This Dodge Dart has a white shell top instead of my dad's car that has a black shell top. My dad can't believe it. They pull over the car and inside the car is an arsenal of guns. He was coming to take care of lead pipe guy. They arrest him too. My father never saw another Dodge Dart in that color for the rest of the years that he owned that car. Not a cop. So I used to ride a bike every day to Dunkin' Donuts on Route 11 Rhode Island for about 11 over 12 miles each way. South Kingston to Wakefield. Well, we were hit by a bad blizzard, and in true service industry style I had to be there during a state of emergency, no less. So finally we closed via a call by the owner, because no one in their right mind would drive in it. It made no sense for us to be there. My co-workers offered me a ride home, but I said fuck that. I almost killed a co-worker during Hurricane Sandy, so I told her I'll be fine, since I was prepared. I leave work and surprisingly could easily ride. I had multiple layers on and nearly had the road to myself. So I was happy and nearly making better time over the cars I saw. So I'm singing to myself because it was goddamn beautiful. I guess a half mile into my trip, someone called the cops and Wakefield police started to look for me. They looked for me for a good 30 minutes and couldn't find me because the conditions were so bad. So they were circling to find a dead biker. Eventually I guess they got a second call from another drive further up. I'm not sure. Then they finally saw my tracks. I kept skipping from one side of the road to the other when I saw slow as cars coming. So I'm like 10 miles into my ride when I hear the siren go, whoop whoop. These two young cops pull me over and are like, "What the fuck are you doing?" They put my bike in the back of the SUV and bring me home just a mile from my place. The entire time they are amazed about the time I was making. I guess they just thought there was no possible way someone on a bike could make the time I was till they found my bike track in the snow. On top of that I complicated their search because I was riding across both sides of the freeway. When I could cross they were hilariously awesome. Asked me if I had weed because they needed it. Then they kept joking if I had beer in my house because it was going to be a long day. My family came out and they said I was arrested for felonies. Best way to describe those two were if they came from the movie Super Troopers. They were two young awesome cops. Doubt anyone will see it at this point, but when I was a kid my parents decided to drive us to Disney World. Now I lived in Newfoundland, Canada at the time, so this was a serious undertaking, like 8 days in a van one way. Serious. We brought a lot of stuff to make the trip, including laundry soap, powdered Tide, now somewhere in New Brunswick, also Canada. The Tide box wasn't holding up so well, so my mom poured it into 2 large Ziploc bags, and though meth it's better this now anyways. Fast forward to the border crossing in Maine. Surprisingly no line up to cross and we are stoked thinking this is gonna be quick and dirty, then back on the road. Of course the border security thought, well, we better inspect this vehicle because why would anyone drive that far? So my dad pulls into a search bay and we are rolling our eyes at how much time we are losing while the agents tear the van apart. Then they get to my mother's suitcase and find 2 very large freezer bags filled with white powder. The look on this dude's face when he saw those bags. Anyway, guns are removed from holsters and me, my parents, and my 70+ years old great aunt are on our knees, hands on heads, with our heads against the wall at gunpoint for laundry soap. It didn't go any further than that. My mother insisted it was laundry soap, while the agents scoffed, and I said, have you ever seen Coke with blue flecks in it? Which got the agents talking, and I presume one of them smelled it, because shortly after we were up, and we all had a good laugh, except one agent who warned my parents to never do it again. TLDR, we crossed a border with 2 large bags of powdered laundry detergent and got held at gunpoint and nearly arrested for trafficking. Stealing my dad's best story. Not a cop. Australia in the 80s. So my mum and dad were on their 2nd or 3rd date. Them and some friends were walking through the city after pre-drinks to catch a ferry over to a day party. They pass by a small park and my dad runs in quickly to take a piss in a garden. He was already quite drunk. While walking through the park gates he notices a woman in a trench coat sitting by herself staring at him. Strange, but he ignores it. He starts taking a piss on a tree when a car pulls up and throws a black garbage bag over the park fence towards him. He thinks, Jesus, that's rude. Someone chucking their garbage into a park. He has a closer look at the bag, then thinks nothing of it. He zips up and walks back to my mom and gets on the ferry with her. Next thing he knows, there's black police boats speeding towards the ferry. Police torches on the ferry from all angles. Police announced over the loudspeaker, "Geo, back to the dock and all passengers are to disembark one by one." My tipsy mum and dad are loving the entertainment at this point. The ferry turns around and docks. Cops everywhere at the ferry station. Dozens of them holding shotguns, in SWAT gear, etc. There may have even been a helicopter overhead. One by one passengers disembark as per orders. The whole entourage gets off, then my dad last. He decides to be a comedian and strut off the gangway with his hands on his head. He hears on a nearby policeman's radio, "Yup, that's him with his hands on his head." Now he finally starts shooting bricks. They cuff him, then throw him, mum and the gang, in the back of a police wagon. My mum at this point thinks she may be accidentally dating a serial killer. They get taken to the station and are questioned for hours. Pretty soon cops realize he's innocent. Apparently the child of some rich Chinese parents had been kidnapped and was being held ransom. The parents had been told to drop $2 million off to a guy in the botanical gardens in the city at that exact time. Otherwise the kid was gonna be sleeping with the fishes. $2 million were in that garbage bag. And the spooky chick at the gate was an undercover cop. My dad was let go and everyone eventually got to the party a few hours late and had the best story ever to tell when they arrived. To this day my dad thanks his lucky stars he never opened up that bag. I'm not sure what happened to the Chinese kid or if he survived. Google it if you want. Fuck yeah. My time to shine. I'm not the cop, but the one with a supposed bullshit excuse. I used to have an oldest truck with biggest tires for the STID, which I was at the time. Big tires throw off your speedometer. I was driving to the gym on the highway one day after work. I'm in the middle lane going what I thought was 70 and began to approach a state trooper that was in the passing lane. The speed limit was 70, so I figured whatever, he's just going slow. So I pass him, and as soon as my rear bumper passes his front bumper he turns on his lights and pulls me over. As soon as I roll my window down and hand him my driver's license and insurance, he asks why my truck smelled like weed. I told him I have no idea why my truck would smell like weed, since I don't smoke weed at the time and hadn't in several years, long before I got the truck. He immediately goes from 0 to 100 and says, if you want to fuck around with me, we can do this the hard way and I can call the K9 unit. I tell him to call the K9 because I have nothing to hide. He bets me. My backpack sitting next to me is full of pot. I tell him it has my workout clothes, a phone charger and my Bluetooth speaker I use at work. I give it to him to search, and what was in it? My workout clothes, a phone charger, and my Bluetooth speaker. At this point, I asked him if he was going to call the K9 unit. He walks back to his car with my license and comes back a few minutes later and tells me to have a good day. At no point did he mention the fact I was speeding. For whatever reason, he immediately assumed I had a bunch of weed with me. So if you're a cop, just know that if you do some dumb as shit, you're still going to get talked about on the internet 3 years after the fact. I was the one with the dumb story here. TLDR at the bottom. We had a dog with anxiety when I was about 12, and through some bizarre chain of events said dog got into my backpack and shredded just about everything in it. For the most part that didn't matter, but she ripped my only copy of a term-long project. Had to be handwritten, dumb teacher. So, my dog ate my homework. Being a straight A student that always did her work, I assumed that I would at least be given an extension, but no. The teacher had an absolute fit, actually brought me to tears. In front of the class for not only lying, but coming up with such a shitty lie. I called my mother during break, and for all that she was generally a shitty parent, she went home, collected the sad remains of that term paper, and hauled them over to my school. Point there, she demanded a meeting with that teacher and the principal. Principal was out, but given that a very furious woman was yelling at them, they both met with her. Teacher got called. I got pulled out of class and she went off at him, like you wouldn't believe it. She slapped the torn and partly damp papers on the desk in the room, and part of it actually stuck to the wood because it was so messed up. Point by the end of that meeting, the teacher was about 3 inches tall and stuttering apologies to my mother. Teacher was a nurse to me for the rest of the year, but it was so worth it. Didn't even have to redo the project or anything. One of the VPs decided that, since I'd done the work, I should get like a courtesy grade for it. I don't know what to call it. Got a B. Still finished the class with an ATLDR. My dog actually ate my homework. This is a story from my friend from university. He was hanging out with a bunch of other friends in his dorm. Point they had bought these Chinese pastries known as glutinous rice dumplings, which are covered on the outside with a fine layer of flour. My friend had been eating them and playing video games with his buddies and got some flour on his mouth. For anyone who's never had these, the flour coating on these things is very sticky. Point sometime later, they got a knock on the door, and standing outside were 2 campus cops. Apparently they were responding to a noise complaint because the guys had been a bit raucous while gaming and weren't pleased to have to respond to an on-campus call at this hour of the night. Point the cop sees my friend with the flour on his lips and immediately asks him what it is. My friend answers truthfully. They'd finished the desserts and thrown away the packaging a while ago and had no way to prove that they were eating desserts. And unsurprisingly, the cop thinks they were snorting coke and arrests my friend. Point my friend actually ended up having to spend the night at the police station because the person responsible for drug testing had gone home from work and they had to wait for them to return the next day. Suffice to say, they didn't find any traces of cocaine on him. Point TDLR. My friend got arrested and spent a night in the police station for eating a Chinese dessert because the cops thought the flour on his lips was cocaine. Not a cop, but here's mine. Me and a group of friends are all out drinking one night. We all get extremely drunk and head to a friend's house. Everyone but me and one other person passed out, and we go out on the patio of an apartment complex to smoke a cigarette. Other person goes back inside and I stay out there for one more. I'm walking around in the grass by the lake and enjoying the early morning, still completely wasted. All of a sudden I turn around and can't remember where I started. Point I start walking along the lake and get to the end and realize this isn't right. So I decide to try a different approach. I go to the front of the complex to retrace the street we came in on. I follow my memory and realize I'm not in the right complex. Go back out to the street to walk 1 complex over. Wrong direction. Walk 2 complexes in the opposite direction and no luck. This goes on for literal hours. Just me walking around aimlessly smoking cigarettes. To paint a picture here, I have nothing on me but my cigarettes, a lighter, a wife beater on and basketball shorts on. No phone, no wallet, no shoes. I went for a cigarette at 2 a.m. It's now 6 am and I see people on the streets. Eventually a cop rolls up on me and asks what the fuck I'm doing. I said I'm staying at a friend's house and took a walk only to get lost. They think I'm casing the neighborhood and I'm the world's worst thief. I give them my friend's name, but I forgot that he goes by his middle name, so they search that and nothing comes up. Then I remember his first name and give them that. They have me in the car in cuffs while they find my friend and let me go. About 15 minutes later, the best part is, they asked if I was gonna walk back or if I needed a ride. Almost completely sober at this point, I kinda give the officer a look and say, where exactly would I be walking to? So she takes the cuffs off, tells me to sit in the back and she'll drop me off. Guys, I was a stop sign, one stop sign away from this guy's house. I cold hit him with a rock, if I had one. Story from a friend of mine. So him and I are both performers for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. We travel up and down the west coast doing shows as booked. If you've ever seen our HPS, you might have an idea where this is going. So my buddy, Josh, was going from Seattle to Portland. He himself lives in Grays Harbor County, a much more rural part of Washington. His family has a few farm animal pets, including a goat. But he wasn't in Grays Harbor. He was on the interstate, which is patrolled by state cops. Don't remember why Josh got pulled over, but the officer pulled him over. He was driving a Ford Festiva, and he was in half of his costume. Leather pants, black vest, sparkly high-heeled boots, glitter in his beard. A bit weird for a country boy. Officer tells him to get out of the car and go stand by the cruiser. So now this officer is going through Josh's luggage and finding heels, fishnets, Macupe, a whip, a prop ray gun, and a fanny pack full of $1 bills. Josh's face was as red as the sequins on his tailcoat. Officer cuffs him and tells him to stand in front of the cruiser. Josh cooperates, so the side of the highway is littered with costumes and props and glitter and sequins. The officer is done with his bags and his trunk and searches the floor of the vehicle when he finds a sealed vial with what totally looked like meth. Anyone who's seen our HPS, imagine Frank with the I can explain scene. Josh says it isn't any illegal substance. The rock is a kidney stone that one of his goats passed. Why he had it, who the fuck knows? But he was telling the truth. Of course the officer doesn't believe this. Poor stupid bastard. The officer goes to test it. While he's there testing the rock on the hood of the cruiser, the officer picks it up with tweezers and is inspecting it real closely. He smelled it. Still waiting for the test results, the officer taps it onto his tongue and makes the Mr. Yuck face. The test results say it isn't anything illegal. The cop is still gagging while he uncuffs Josh and tells him to get the fuck out of here, and he drives away before Josh finishes loading his sheet back into the car. So my old boss told me this story, and then a few years later, I got to hear it from the other side. Old boss was a jail guard, so very high stress job. Well, one of the buddies he worked with had turned his garage into a big man cave / hangout spot for the jail guarda to come to when they needed to wind down or blow off some steam. As a result, the garage essentially was constantly occupied by a handful of guys. One night there was 6 or 7 of them hanging out when there is a knock on the door. Strange, because everyone just walks in. So one guy opens it and there stands the damn SWAT team. Cops come in, ready to rumble, until they look around, realize everyone is still in their jail uniforms and it's literally just some after work beers. Fast forward a couple years, and I'm chatting to a friend of a friend who is a cop when he starts regaling us with this hilarious story. Apparently a very young looking guy bought a house in a nice neighborhood, so the neighbors thought he might be a criminal. How else could he afford it? And they decide to keep an eye on him. Then they start seeing construction trucks coming and going from the detached garage in the backyard, so they get even more suspicious. A few weeks later, they start seeing this stream of guys coming and going from the garage. Big meathead criminal looking types with dark clothes and tattoos and always looking kinda angry. They start keeping track and realize that there is almost always someone in the garage, so they decide they have enough evidence and call the cops. Cops start the ball rolling and decide to move on the place, thinking it's the home location of some criminal organization, but it was actually just a bunch of guys having a few beer and playing poker TLDR. Bunch of jail guards having garage party get mistaken for drug dealers, and SWAT almost arrests them. Not a cop, but I can remember an interesting stop in college. Around 2011, I was driving my car to a friend's house. I was and still am into drifting. At the time, my two-door coupe was rear-wheel drive, had a welded differential, which means the rear wheels are essentially locked into rotating at the same time at all times. So sometimes my tires screech and hop around corners on my way to the house. I see a cop sitting in a convenience store parking lot right next to me. I make a right turn, sure to obey the stop sign, and go slowly and safely, but my car's tires screech over the white crosswalk paint pretty loudly. He rushes out and pops his lights to pull me over, probably thinking I blew past the stop sign and slid around the corner. He asks where I'm going in such a rush. Now my car is pretty stock looking at this point, just slightly lowered, some wheels and an exhaust. It's not visually loud at all. I tell him that it's my differential doing that and I wasn't driving unsafely. He doesn't buy it and lectures me about how unsafe college kids drive in this area. It's clear he wants to write me ticket. For what exactly? No clue. But I say, sir, look, I can show you. Let me make a U-turn and show you what it does. While pulled over, I slowly make a U-turn on the two-way road I was pulled over on. I've got modified steering angle which gives me amazing turn radius, and sure enough the rear of my car starts hopping and screeching like mad. He's literally overcome with surprises. It's clear he's never seen anything like that, and asks me more about drifting in general and the mechanics of why my car is set up that way. Knowing I was a student at the aeronautical university nearby, he just lets me go and says drive safe. Funny how quickly his demeanor changed when I proved I wasn't bullshitting him. Okay, I've never had a better opportunity. Here we fine go. Point. When I was in college I was going through to the next town over for every day. It got to the point where the town was my place. I didn't have much reason to be in my hometown, so I wasn't. So this town, very little crime, just a small tourist town, so they crack down on little things like people smoking pot and such. A hotspot for drug deals was behind their train station, so police often waited there to catch people on their way out. One of my closest friends lived just over the road. Awesome viewpoint, so one day we decide to fuck with them, have a good laugh, and wrapped what's it in tinfoil, walked into the opposite side of the train station, and came out the closer. My friend's watching from the window as I leave the train station knowing the police are about to come harass me. I made the act of putting this what's it into my pocket clear as I could, and it worked wonderfully. They immediately approached me and asked what I'd just put in my pocket. I responded and told them the truth. It's a bloody what's it wrapped in tinfoil. Obviously they didn't believe me. This went around a few times until they searched me and learned how they'd just been faked with. Cool cops. They had a good laugh about it, and I went on my way. Here we go. It gets better. Guess what I did about a week later? Bought some pot behind the train station. Guess what cops asked it around the corner? I tell them I've got a bag of weed in my pocket. Open and honestly, they don't believe a word. I almost wanted to take it out and show them out of principle, but yeah, one of the most unbelievable experiences I've had. Not a cop, but 8 years ago, when I used to work at Petco, a cow walker, and I had a long bad day. She didn't want to go home just yet because her roommates were shitty and hadn't left for work yet, so I told her to come at my house for a bit until they left. We drive to my house and my parents are fighting, so we juice out and chill at the local park in my car. The park was known for fishy activity at night, and well, it was night. Cop pulls up and wants to know what we are doing at the park. I told him the full story and that we are waiting for my parents to chill out. My coworker had been crying, so she looked pretty bad. He shined the light in her face and said she looked high, then made her step out of the car. The cop was a real ass, by the way. Not only did he have a nasty attitude, but when my friend didn't step out quickly enough for him because she was crying, he grabbed her forcibly. He made her sit on the concrete, comes back to me and shined the light in my car. He shined it in the right spot and asks me, is that weed on the passenger seat? Of course my heart starts pounding and I'm freaking out, not just because there is possible weed in my car, but I'm also allergic He instructed I pick it up, and I told him I can't, I'm allergic. So he made my friend get up and pick it up. Well, I'm a clean freak and keep hand sanitizer in my car. It was this nice green aloe one, and I guess I had cleaned my hands. Some splashed on the seat, and the Texas seat made it look like a small weed bud. The cop had the most stupid look on his face when I told him it was my hand sanitizer, and lucky me, it was in the cup holder, so he could see it. My coworker and I laughed. He was annoyed and let us leave. Then at work the next day, my coworker tells me she had at least a gram of weed in her purse that night. We would have been faked if not for the hand sanitizer. Got a pretty good story, but it'll probably drown in the thread. Not a cop, but had an amusing run-in with some friends. My friends and I were very keen on natural history, and one time we parked near the shore and swam to a small rocky outcrop to see what we could find. After a few happy hours observing the place and collecting all manner of interesting insects, plants, and rocks, we swam back to the mainland and made for the car. Now my friends were two brothers and both suffered from sudden nosebleeds, which they both happened to get for some reason as they got out of the water. As we get into the car, shirtless with bloody tissues everywhere, and we're just about to leave, we hear a loud whoop, and a police car just swerves in behind us, blocking us in. Bewildered, we get out of the car and a pair of cops tell us to put our hands on the vehicle. Turns out they saw my friend's nosebleeds and decided we must be doing coke, so they proceed to pat us down, search the car, and check our particulars. We tried to explain what we were just doing and what had happened, but they weren't buying it. Eventually, whilst searching the car to no avail, one of the cops comes out with a smug look on his face holding a small white old pill box. I recognized it immediately, but before I could say anything my friend just says, "Officer, I wouldn't open that if I were you." The cop is immediately on guard and asks why not, and my friend says, "It's full of spiders." The cop just scoffs at us, and with a derisive "Yeah right," he opens the pill box and a solid stream of 20 or so very pissed off spiders make their quick break for freedom all the way up his arm. I cannot describe the sheer look of confused horror on the man's face as he realized what just happened. After a few frantic minutes thoroughly brushing himself down, he was a good sport, told us he finally believes us after all, and wished us a nice day. This is my excuse, and it was 100% true. I was in college and went to my boyfriend's fraternity formal. My midterm was the next day. I drank exactly 1 cup of hunch punch and was faked up, like throwing up dying. I finally make it back to his house, but I knew I had an 8 AM midterm. I couldn't risk oversleeping or showing up in formal wear. My house was about 3 miles away, so I decided I'd walk 3 miles, barefoot. At 2 am I had my car keys and cell phone. At some point I guess I blacked out. I came out of a blackout when I saw flashing lights. I was pissed because in my mind I'm not disturbing anyone. I just want to get cleaned up and sober for my exam. Cop asks me what I'm doing. I said walking home. He asks why. I said because I'm not going to drive drunk and I have a midterm in the morning and I didn't mean to get drunk. He asked how I got drunk and I said party and cup of hunch punch. He tells me to get in the back of the car and he'll take me home. I proceed to tell him it's okay if you're going to take me to jail, but can you call my dad first? I have an 8 AM midterm. He keeps insisting I'm not going to jail. I told him it's okay, just call my dad. He denies that I'm going to jail. He asks where I came from. I told him I walked from my boyfriend's house. He asked if that's where my car is. I said yes. He asks for my boyfriend's address. I comply. He drives me to my boyfriend's house, asks which car is mine. I told him. He tells his partner to get out and touch the hood. Partner yells back that it's cold. Officer tells me to get out of the car. Officer and partner take me into boyfriend's house, put me on the couch, set my phone alarm for 6 AM, and tell me you understand that we are doing this because you told the truth and didn't drive drunk. Good luck on your midterm, and please don't walk alone at night. I was in shock and went to sleep. But oh my god, they ignored the bong on the kitchen table and the alcohol and the fact I was underage. He also realized I'd need my car to get to class and didn't want to risk me walking back to my car. I was 19 years old and a freshman. but that changed how I viewed police officers and alcohol. Not a cop but someone who was pulled over. I'm driving around at like 11:30 p.m. about to head to Dunkin' Donuts near my house. The light just turned red, so I decided to cut through some of the residential streets. I end up at another light and let rip a disgusting fatched while I wait for the light to change. Light turns green a second or two later, and I see lights go on behind me as I panic and pull over, rolling down, by hand, my window as I get to the sidewalk. I drove a beat up 1995 hatchback Civic with out of state plates, so I kinda figured of course I'm getting pulled over. The cop comes around, and before anything is said, goes, "Woo, that stinks. Smells like you got something in here." So I'm a little bit embarrassed and just get out of the car when he told me to and head to the back. Cop A questions me about smoking pot while his partner searches my car. I'll let him know I haven't smoked in years, and to save them time, I honestly had just fatched it right before I got pulled over. He looks at me deadpan, says, "You're cheating me," and I tell him not at all. Kinda embarrassed, just figured I'd be honest. Cop A goes, "Alright, we'll see what my partner finds." Cop B comes back empty-handed, and Cop A says, "Why don't you tell my partner what you told me?" So I tell him, and he just shakes his head. I wish them a good night, get in my car, and laugh maniacally as I continue my trip to Dunkin'. TLDR, fatched it right before I was pulled over. Cops thought I was a drug dealer. Got both to take big whiffs of it, faking hilarious. Probably be buried, but here we go. Was in college. Decided to go to a party after a 12-hour shift and drove there after work dead tired and looking like shit. 6 a.m. Saturday starts. Hungover even at 22 is brutal. It was like less than a mile from my house, so was just going to walk it home after. Planned on getting drunk. Barely a Coors Light in, some drunk moron literally spills a pitcher of beer all over me on the way to beer pong. I also proceeded to try to avoid said beer and smacked my head on a cabinet. Well, here I was with drenched clothes and a bruised forehead. I said, "Fuck it," and was over the night and proceeded to drive home. Also, my car front end was bashed in from when my girlfriend had borrowed my car 2 days earlier and rear-ended someone. This will come in later, so head home and roll the stop sign like I always do near my house. Well, I get pulled over of course with a dented front end of my car, bruised forehead, look like shit, I'm completely soaked, and reek of cheap beer. Oh, and I had like 4 of a 6-pack in my back seat that I had taken from said party. I live next to campus too, and let's say cops didn't believe a word I said. Almost an hour of sobriety tests, and 3 breathalyzers later they finally let me go. All 7 cops/campus cops that decided to come to the scene thought it was hilarious how guilty I looked. Small college town. Pays to me nice and cordial though. I cracked innocent jokes and acted like I was nicest kid on earth. Sure, it helped I was a preppy white guy too. But they didn't even write me up for the rolled stop sign. The first cop even laughed and said, "I thought you were the easiest DUI of the month. Damn son, you've had a shitty few days." Not a cop, but a minor legendary story among the local motorcycle crowd. If you've ever been out on the road at 3:30 to 4 a.m. in a non-major city, you know that it's a ghost town. Also, if you ride sport bikes, you know that speed can easily creep up on you. You see where this is going. A guy I know from riding was working a series of early shifts and decided to take his bike to work. As he's riding up the deserted freeway, he caught a bit of flashing red and blue about 1.5 miles back. Of course he checked his speedo, finally, and realized he was cruising in triple-digit territory. Realizing that he wasn't going to outrun a radio and there were no other vehicles on the road, he pulled over to wait for the inevitable. The cop overshot him and had to reverse. By the time he arrived, the rider had his gloves and helmet off and was leaning on his bike. The cop was understandably pissed. "What are you doing? You think you have a license to race?" The rider opened his wallet, took out his AMA motorcycle racing license, and put it on the seat. Actually, the cop just looked at it for a second. Yeah, I kind of walked into that. 1. The rider was not ticketed because the cop never got a good place or radar lock on him from that distance, but his plate and description were put out to that shift of highway patrol, and he was warned that he would probably be arrested if they caught him riding That fast again. Point considering some of the shit I've seen this guy do on a bike. I 100% believe his story. Not a cop, but I've only seen about 3 actual cops here anyway. Point this story is a friend's, but it's too good not to share. For context, my friend, Joe, for storytelling purposes, is about as straight-laced as they come. Works it 3 days a week, and is an awesome husband/dad in his time off. He also runs a photography business as a side hustle, and has been fairly successful, photographing famous athletes and musicians, etc., but is still willing to drop everything to help a friend. Just an all-around good guy who you'd never expect to see on the wrong side of the law. Point as I mentioned, Joe works as a photographer, and does some film as well. He had been asked to help with filming interviews for a documentary about the lives of erotic dancers/strippers. This isn't the type of thing he would normally do, but he and his wife were okay with it, because the documentary really promoted safety and good decision making for women in the industry. As I recall, the project was being directed by one of the older models at the strip club, because she wanted to share her perspective and advice with the younger models. Long and short, he met at the strip club, helped film some interviews, and said he'd call the director back to meet with the edited footage in a few days. Fairly straightforward shoot. Joe finishes up the edits and puts everything together, some printed still shots, memory cards of the footage, and a bit of paperwork he had to fill out into a paper bag. He calls up and the director and asks where she'd like to meet. She was busy, so he could make arrangements to meet one of the younger dancers after she got off of work. Joe contacted the younger woman and she suggested a parking lot near his home that was on her way home from work. Joe somehow doesn't realize how sketchy this sounds and agrees, so later the next evening, I think it was around 11 o'clock, Joe rolls up to the parking lot and meets the young woman. I believe she was in her early 20s, he is in his mid-30s. He hands her the paper bag, she hands him an envelope with his check in it, and they both get back into their cars. It was an efficient transaction and Joe was excited to get home. Unfortunately for him, they didn't even make it out of the parking lot before they were surrounded by police. As it turns out, that parking lot was well known for being a place where gang members would exchange drugs because it was near a quick on/off for the freeway. The cops saw Joe accepting payment for an unmarked paper bag and assumed they were about to make a big bust. Apparently they were not at all amused by his explanation for what was going on, and the semi-erotic nature of the film he was working on certainly didn't help his case. After a few phone calls and a search of Joe's car, the cops let him go. They told him he was an idiot and the next time he wanted to get a client their footage, he should just mail them a flash drive. Or, at the very least, meet in literally any other parking lot in the entire city. TLDR, friend is entirely clueless as to appropriate methods for exchanging goods and services. Accordingly, he wastes the time of local police. I don't know if mall cop is the same as a real cop, but here it goes. My friend wanted to buy a camera, so we went into a mall that had a big electronics shop. It's called MediaMarkt, and they have stores in some European countries. So we go in, browse the items on display for some time, and because we didn't find what we were looking for, headed for the exit. Now those shops have rougher detectors at the exits and near the cash register. We were almost through when the alarm at the exit sounded. So we stop, turn around, enter the detection area again, and sure thing we get another alarm. The security guy comes and checks me first with the detector stick. No alarm. Checks my friend. No alarm. I pass the detector threshold again. No alarm. My friend passes. Alarm blaring. He starts to sweat. Now 2 more security guys approach, and they gently ask my friend to follow them to a private room. Him thinking he's gonna get probed, and at first didn't want to follow, but his eyes were asking for help, so I go after them. Enter the room and they ask him to put the stuff from his pockets to the table. Home keys, wallet, small change. They go with a detector stick over the wallet and alarm blares. So he opens the wallet and takes out some money, 2 visit cards and a condom. The rougher chip was on the back of the freaking condom. We start to go out, and we hear the security guy telling over the radio what they found. All the way out the mall, security guys were laughing their ass off. And another one Another friend going back to another country after being home for vacation. Random check at the airport. They find a jar of green dry leaves in his bag. The conversation goes, "What is this? Oregano point, yeah right." They open the jar. It's oregano. Not a cop, but will forever wonder what the cop was thinking that pulled me over. My dad calls and asks if I can come help butcher a sheep. I agree, but he also needs me to bring a gun over because my brother the felon was living with them, and they put this in storage point, so I go over and help butcher the sheep. My kids come with me and get some nana time too. When I'm done, I have a cooler with some meats to take home and no change of clothes. I'm headed home going about 20 over on an empty county road when a policeman pulls me over. This was also a couple days after the Dallas cop attacks. Cop is approaching the window and I let him know I have a gun in the passenger seat, and as he puts his hand on his gun, I holler and I can explain why I'm covered in blood. I explain. He asks if I would come back to the squad car because he's uncomfortable with the gun right there. I tell him I don't feel comfortable leaving my kids in the car with a gun. He agrees. After a long silence, I offer to let him take the gun back with him. He says he can't do that. After another long silence, then I suggest that he set the gun outside the car so he can see it, so he will feel comfortable. He agrees to this. He comes back and said he's going to let me go, not even a warning, and thanks me for making him feel comfortable. The thing I found most funny, never once asked me where my wife was. I think he decided that I was either telling the truth or I wasn't and would try and kill him. TLDR. Pulled over covered in blood with a firearm after butchering a sheep and cop let me go without even a warning. Not a cop, but have a great, long story. A few years back, I was getting ready to propose to my wife, girlfriend at the time, obviously. We were at college in Greensboro, North Carolina, where we met, and I knew a spot downtown that was beautiful at sunset next to the railroad tracks, older buildings with vines growing on them, no graffiti, etc. I knew that she loved Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which, ironically, was just something she told me because I liked the show, and she liked me, and I sent her on a S.H.I.E.L.D. themed scavenger hunt with a lockbox that, little did she know, had the ring in it. Eventually, she was to meet me at the railroad tracks at sunset and I would unlock the box and propose. Well, she was running ahead of schedule, so I had a friend manning one of the spots on the scavenger hunt stall her. Meanwhile, a sheetload of our mutual friends showed up near me and hid behind a billboard to watch the proposal. Sunset came and went, and I realized that our friend overstalled her. I tell our photographer, who was hiding at the time, that we should go to the sidewalk where she could see me since the sun went down and it's dark on the tracks. Well, I start heading to the sidewalk and a guy passes me with a flashlight talking on the phone to someone. I come to realize in the coming minute that he had called the cops since he thought I was committing suicide on the railroad tracks, as I have been waiting for my girl for over 2 hours in total. They ask me what I was doing in the tracks and explain the whole thing. They did not believe me and cuff me. Real police cuffs are surprisingly comfortable. As I was being walked to the cop car, I see my wife across the street. I point her out and they go question her. Not recognizing me from so far away, she almost said that she did not know me. After they mentioned my name, she confirmed the story. The cop returned to me in the car to uncuff me and explain that being on railroad tracks is trespassing, but considering the situation, he let me off with a warning. I ran over and proposed, totally forgetting my speech I had planned, and she said yes. As we kissed, the cops let the sirens go off for a few seconds. TLDR, I tried to propose to my wife on railroad tracks at sunset next to a beautiful building. Someone thinks I'm committing suicide and calls the cops, who do not believe my story, since my wife was running late. Edited to tag my wife/you/wonderful old woman. I'm not police, but at uni I had a friend staying with me from Glasgow. He got a little bit too drunk, so I was keeping an eye on him to make sure he got back to my place. 2 AM. Nightclub is closing, and we come around the back. He's taking a piss in an alleyway. When the police see him doing it, it's frustrating, but no big deal. It's something like £50 on the spot fine but nothing on your permanent record, so I just sort of hang around whilst they take his details. All of a sudden the police have him aggressively up against the wall and cuffing him. I start to intervene because he really hadn't done anything, and then bam, I'm up against the wall, 2-point screeching of tires, and there's another police car and suddenly there are 5 officers involved. I ask what's happening and they tell me that my friend is wanted for threatening people with a firearm, a very rare thing in Scotland. People in cities just don't have guns. My friend is protesting his innocence so vehemently that they actually start to believe him. So from there they take us over into the train station and get him to look into the CCTV camera so they can verify his ID somehow. I guess they might have access to certain feeds. Long pause, and then the whole thing massively de-escalates. We are both uncuffed and the police explain that it's a case of mistaken identity. Turns out the crazy guy threatening people with a gun has the same name as my pal, is from the same town, is the same age, and had been threatening people outside of the club we had just came out of. We are both sort of shaken when they let us go and go back home, before realizing that in all the excitement they didn't actually book him for pissing in an alleyway, which is a win. Not a cop, but I have 2 stories. I was heading home on a small rural road, had to pull over and stop because I felt that my stomach was acting up. That caused a police car to do a U-turn and a female police officer wanted to check my driver's license and registration papers. I could only find my driver's license. I was sitting with my shoes on the ground and said, "I don't think it's wise for you to be this close, miss, because I'm really nauseous." She promptly retreated back a few feet, and the registration papers was suddenly not that important anymore. I was pulled over because I was above the speed limit by a really cute little female police officer. I signed the equivalent to $250 fine, no problems with that. She then spotted my 2m/70 cm ICOM radio. I'm a radio amateur with a license, and got really curious about what the gizmo was. I explained to her the purpose of it and showed her my license card. She had not seen anything like that before, so I guess I educated her a bit on the subject. I also told her that we use the old analog system that the police used before they went to Tetra, closed encrypted system, because it was cheaper to just reprogram it for radio amateur usage. Decommissioning the old analog system was just too expensive. We have really good coverage with that system. It covers 3 states. In my country, it's possible to get vanity registration plates, but they are really expensive, $1,000. I was friends with some cops while I was a college student, and they've had some interesting stories, one of which involved some mutual friends. One of them stopped by the 7-Eleven. A friend of mine was at around 1 AM. Let's call him Matt, my friend Sal, and the clerk on duty edition. All of them I considered my friends at the time. Matt was a little surprised to see Sack outside the 7-Eleven leaning on the bike post for support. He initially thought he was drunk. What happened was basically along these lines: Matt, "Hey Sal, isn't it a bit early in the week to be drinking?" Sal, "Hey." Matt, "This guy pulled a knife trying to rob the place and stabbed me, Ed, and I beat the shit out of him and has him locked up inside. Told me not to move, and he's trying to get some bandages here." Matt laughed it off at first. He knew full well Sal wasn't much of a drinker and probably thought he was making some excuse, so he walked on, and once he got in, Matt's laughter disappeared when he saw an unconscious man on the floor with Ed on his way out with some first aid supplies. Ed, Matt, "Holy shit man, get an ambulance and arrest this guy. This crazy faker pulled a knife trying to rob us and stabbed Sal a bunch." Matt turned around and in the light of the store got a better look and saw Sal was indeed covered in blood and was barely standing, not because he was drunk, but because adrenaline was probably all that was keeping him up despite the shock of the attack and the blood loss. Well, Matt quickly called in for EMS to rush Sal to the hospital and helped Ed try to patch Sal up the best he could until they showed and arrested the would-be robber. Apparently Sal finally passed out from blood loss seconds after the EMS showed up. Sal spent the next few days in the hospital but recovered completely. When I visited him, he claims didn't even realize he was stabbed and bleeding to death until Ed pointed it out and told him to stand still. Not a cop. I was the perp. My best bud is a personal trainer and we are both into all kinds of outdoorsy military gear. He's crazy about his knives. I like bushcraft and guns, and we share tips on clothing that holds up to exposure to the outdoors. This means we take the occasional shopping trip together. He was also dating one of my lady friends at the time, and she'd heard through the nephew of a co-worker that the army surplus store he worked at was about to get a new container of product, which only happens about once a year. So we all decided to take the day off and use his employee discount to get some sweet gear. My lady friend picked me up, and we swung by the local version of Walmart, and I got her a tarp to cover her motorbike, since I'd stolen her old one for my truck a few days before, as it was way too large for her bike. For whatever reason she decided to buy herself a bra, and she got some gloves as it had been cold in the morning. I grabbed a couple of large plastic containers because I was in the middle of moving, and she got some too because she's a fucking hoarder. Actually, I was also helping her get rid of all of her recently deceased mum's stuff that was blocking every walking space in her house. After that we went to pick up my buddy, but he pointed out that we are running way early. We should go to the local knife/outdoors warehouse and check out the knives. He was specifically looking to replace some parts on his folding knife. It's illegal to carry a knife in public without a good excuse in this country, but we figured that getting your knife serviced was reason enough. So we cruise on over, and sure enough, there are some goddamn nice knives. I figure I'm spending money today, so I get a couple of cheap throwing knives because I've never thrown a knife before. He gets his rather more expensive knife looked at and cool. They have paracord, so we buy a few meters to help secure the girl's tarp on her bike. We are just walking out with our purchases in bags when the girl gets a call. Another co-worker needs the camera lens she has in her car, and she's only about 10 blocks away, so we arrange to meet her outside of the cafe she's sitting at and drop off the lens. We drive on over, passing by a police stop where they give us hard stares, and pull up outside the cafe. Lady runs out, gets the box with the lens in it, and runs back in. We start to drive off to finally go to the surplus store, and we are suddenly surrounded by police cars and being told to turn off the engine. The cops pull us out and cuff us in front of about 1,000 people. It's midday Friday just off the busiest street in the country. Everyone is on their lunch break and start asking us about knives and wanting to search the car. The girl hasn't been cuffed, but she's talking loudly at them, demanding to know what's going on, and a woman cop is threatening to taser her if she doesn't start complying. All the cops seem really young. While this is going on, unmarked cars pull up and more cops get out with their AR-15s, as you can imagine. We are thinking, what the actual fuck? I can hear my buddy talking shit to the cops just to wind them up, because clearly we've done nothing wrong. The cops search the girl's car, and what do you know, they find a tarpaulin, underwear, paracord, gloves, knives, and a number of big plastic storage containers with lids. The cops are getting visibly excited. Before I continue, I should describe what we look like. I'm fairly solid, and I have a mountain man beard and several big visible scars from surgery. My buddy is your average 6'x bodybuilding gym buff, and the girl is a typical boggin who always wears black, and she's also quite tall. By this stage we've told the cops several times that we are not breaking the law, that we were shopping and just bought the knives, and they're both still in their shrink wrapped boxes, and we have receipts. The station sergeant is on the scene by now, and my buddy overhears him telling all the other cops that they are wasting their time, and he walks off angry. The armed cops pack up their stuff and leave, laughing and shaking their heads. Regardless, we all get packed into different cars and driven to the station to be questioned. I'm making small talk along the way, and the cops are just looking back at me occasionally with this one look. By this stage I've asked to call a lawyer, and she says not to say anything, don't answer questions. So we don't. They keep asking us what we were doing with knives, the tarp, the gloves, the rope, the containers, the underwear, etc. We spend about 6 hours at the station, 5 of them in the cells, before giving DNA swabs and being charged with possession of a knife in public and receive a court date. Then they let us go home. So we go out to dinner and try to figure out what the fuck just happened. The next day I talk to a lawyer my brother knows, and he's pretty confused as to why we'd be charged, while the first lawyer we talked to wanted $5k each. just to make our first court appearance. This guy says he'll take care of the whole thing for $1,500 each. He's no back alley lawyer either. He puts an ex-queen's counsel from his firm on it. Her boyfriend carries a knife for work all the time, so she's solidly on our side. She writes to the cops and demands an explanation point. It turns out there was a witness, but the cops hadn't provided a witness statement other than "I saw some bad guys" and called the police. So the police go back and get a second statement, and it goes like this. I was driving down the road when I saw these bad guys come out of a place I know to be a knife store. They looked like they were looking for trouble. I slowed down and stopped to watch them, and they got in a black car, so I called the police. The police immediately recruited me to help them with the arrest, and sent out a black helicopter to follow them, and asked me to follow them as well, so I tailed the car through the streets. They tried to lose me several times and drove evasively until finally the cops blocked them and arrested them. This was pure insanity. No sheet. Black vehicles featured multiple times in it. Now we know why the cops were reluctant to take a second statement. My lawyer came to court and showed it to the police prosecutor on our second hearing, and all of the charges were withdrawn. So for the low price of $1,500 I now know how the court system works, how the police work, and what to do in that situation. We could have gone for costs because of the wrongful arrest, but we decided to leave it at that and not stir up anything else. Everyone we know thought we were badass, and now we have a good story to tell. To add on to the rest of the not a cop folk, here's my story. Picture this: hot June night in the summer of 19. It's just getting to 10 o'clock and a friend of mine I had the hots for texts me saying she's bored and might go on a drive. I had work the next morning, of course, but me being the teenager I thought it was a totally rational decision to go, and that I'd have enough sleep for the next day. I really did not, but I powered through. We are out driving around. It's about 12 o'clock. We start just driving south. We got to about an hour off the state border and started thinking of stuff we could go do. I remembered a state park had some flooding, and so we went. Because why not? We arrive around 1, parked the car out front of the park at the sign that said park closed. Presumably a DNR employee passes for their shift change, and the guy damn near ran us over. He was going a little speedy. In a ho, 10 minutes pass by, and we see that car stopped up at the little entry shack. I said we should start heading back to the car, so we did, and lo and behold, before we even got our seatbelts on, we get swarmed by county stars with the whole nines on point. They definitely weren't gonna buy that 2 jackass teenagers were out past curfew over 3 counties from home just to see some flooding. They did, somehow, but they told us to scoot along, and that we were in violation of curfew. And that's the rest of the story. Just kidding. Then on our way back, and in the county just below ours, we get pulled over by yet another county sheriff. We were admittedly speeding, and he told us he was searching for a pair of people in a car similar to ours that was checking out homes and cars to break into. Yikes. Then this jackass just zooms by in this red Pontiac convertible with the top down, I guess somehow ignoring the bright Christmas tree located behind us. All we hear is a chink 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 of keys, and he throws the licenses to us and gives us a verbal warning. Then a similar chink 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 run back to the car as he speeds off to catch that guy. Safe to say, eventful night.